James Madison, the fourth U.S. President, 1809 to 1817, and widely hailed as the father of the Constitution, was a foundational political philosopher and statesman. His meticulous work at the 1787 Constitutional Convention, co-authorship of the Federalist Papers, and drafting of the Bill of Rights fundamentally shaped American democracy. Introduction to the architect of American democracy. James Madison, Jr. was born on March 16, 1751, in Port Conway, Virginia. Born into wealth as the eldest son of a prominent plantation owner in Orange County, he grew up with privileges that allowed him to pursue higher education, ultimately graduating from the College of New Jersey, now Princeton University. Though often described as small in stature, standing only 5 feet 4 inches tall and rarely weighing more than 100 pounds, Madison possessed an intellectual giant's mind. Frail health kept him from fighting in the American Revolutionary War, so he directed his immense energy and intellect toward the world of ideas and political statecraft. Madison's early foray into politics began when he served on the Orange County Committee of Safety in 1774. By 1776, he was a delegate to the Virginia Convention that drafted the state's constitution, where he struck up a lifelong friendship and political alliance with Thomas Jefferson. Together, they championed religious freedom and laid the groundwork for the separation of church and state, with Madison significantly contributing to the Virginia Declaration of Rights. He served in the Continental Congress in the early 1780s, where he quickly became frustrated with the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, the nation's first governing document. The father of the Constitution, following the Revolutionary War, the young United States struggled under the Articles of Confederation, which left the national government too weak to tax, regulate commerce, or raise an adequate army. Madison believed that without a stronger federal structure, the fragile Union would collapse. In 1786, he helped organize a convention in Annapolis to discuss trade issues, which ultimately paved the way for the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia the following year. Madison arrived in Philadelphia in 1787 incredibly well-read and prepared. He had spent months studying ancient and modern confederacies, determined to find a way to balance liberty with order in a large republic. He worked with the Virginia delegation to develop the Virginia Plan, which served as the guiding framework for the new government. This plan proposed a strong national government divided into 3 distinct branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. It also introduced a system of checks and balances designed to prevent any single branch or any majority faction from seizing absolute power. Throughout the grueling months of the convention, Madison was more than just a planner. He was the most active debater, and he meticulously recorded every word of the proceedings in his personal notes. Because the convention was held in strict secrecy, Madison's notes remain the single most important and detailed historical record of how the U.S. Constitution was crafted. Championing ratification and the Federalist Papers drafting the Constitution was only the first step. The document then had to be ratified by the states. It faced significant opposition from anti-federalists, who feared that a strong central government would erode state sovereignty and threaten individual liberties. To build public support and explain the theory behind the Constitution, Madison collaborated with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay to write a series of 85 essays, collectively known as the Federalist Papers. Madison's contributions to the Federalist Papers, particularly Federalist No. 10 and Federalist No. 51, are considered masterworks of political philosophy. In Federalist No. 10, he addressed the danger of factions, groups of citizens united by a common interest adverse to the rights of others, and argued that a large republic is the best defense against the tyranny of the majority. In Federalist No. 51, he famously articulated the need for the separation of powers and checks and balances, writing, "Ambition must be made to counteract ambition." Madison's persuasive writing and logical debates proved crucial. He later traveled to Virginia, where implementation of the Constitution was fiercely debated, most notably by Patrick Henry. Through careful and precise argumentation, Madison convinced the Virginia Convention to ratify the document, a necessary victory given Virginia's size and political influence. The Bill of Rights, though the Constitution was ratified, many opponents, including Thomas Jefferson, were highly critical of the fact that it lacked explicit protections for individual rights. To appease critics and prevent the call for a second, potentially destructive constitutional convention, Madison promised to push for a Bill of Rights. In 1789, during the First Congress, Madison was elected to the House of Representatives. He took the lead in drafting a series of constitutional amendments, sifting through hundreds of suggestions proposed by the states. From these, he introduced resolutions that eventually became the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, known as the Bill of Rights. These amendments placed strict limits on the power of the federal government and guaranteed foundational freedoms, including freedom of speech, religion, and the press, as well as the right to a fair trial. For his dual role in authoring the Constitution and securing the Bill of Rights, Madison rightfully earned the moniker Father of the Constitution, although he humbly maintained that the document was the work of many heads and many hands. Political evolution and the presidency. As the new federal government took shape, Madison became increasingly alarmed by the policies of Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton, which he believed favored wealthy financial interests and consolidated too much power in the central government. Partnering again with Thomas Jefferson, Madison broke away from the Federalist Party to form the Democratic-Republican Party. This marked the birth of America's first organized political opposition, establishing the foundation for the modern party system. When Jefferson became president in 1801, he appointed Madison as his Secretary of State. Madison served in this role for 8 years, navigating tense foreign relations as European powers clashed. Following Jefferson's 2 terms, Madison was elected as the 4th President of the United States in 1808. Madison's presidency was largely defined by escalating tensions with Great Britain, as the British continued to harass American merchant ships and impress American sailors into the Royal Navy. Seeking to defend American maritime rights and national honor, Madison asked Congress for a declaration of war in June 1812, officially launching the War of 1812. The War of 1812 was a formidable challenge for the young, ill-prepared United States. The country faced early military setbacks, and British troops famously marched into Washington, D.C. in 1814, setting fire to the White House and the Capitol. However, the U.S. military eventually secured notable victories on land and at sea, culminating in General Andrew Jackson's decisive win at the Battle of New Orleans. These successes, along with the conclusion of the war via the Treaty of Ghent in 1814, generated a massive wave of nationalism across the country. The Federalist Party, which had opposed the war, was severely discredited, allowing Madison to conclude his presidency with heightened national popularity. Later life, legacy, and death. Upon leaving the presidency in 1817, Madison retired to Montpelier, his sprawling plantation estate in Orange County, Virginia. While out of national office, he remained actively involved in public life. He served as co-chair of the Virginia Constitutional Convention in 1829 to 1830 and spent considerable time organizing and editing his notes from the 1787 Constitutional Convention. Madison was also a man of his time, which included complex contradictions regarding human rights. Like several other founders, he was a slave owner. While he recognized that the institution of slavery was a grave moral and political issue that threatened to tear the nation apart, he struggled to find a viable solution, at one point advocating for the deportation and resettlement of freed African Americans to Africa. In his later years, Madison expressed deep concern over the rising sectional divisions and the growing arguments over states' rights that threatened to break the federal union he had helped create. In a note to be opened after his death, he left a poignant message to his fellow citizens. The advice nearest to my heart and deepest in my convictions is that the union of the states be cherished and perpetuated. James Madison passed away peacefully at Montpelier on June 28, 1836, at the age of 85. He was survived by his vivacious and politically astute wife, Dolly Madison, who had famously saved the portrait of George Washington from the burning White House during the War of 1812. Today, Madison's legacy remains inextricably linked to the founding ideals of the United States. Through his masterful intellect, strategic compromises, and deep commitment to Republican values, he provided the foundational framework of governance that continues to guide American democracy and inspire nations around the world. Philosophical foundations. Republican remedy. To truly understand James Madison's contribution, one must appreciate the philosophy he brought to American statecraft. Madison was convinced that ancient democracies inevitably failed because they lacked proper structural safeguards against tyranny, both the tyranny of oppressive rulers and the tyranny of the majority. In his view, a Republican remedy was necessary to cure the diseases that afflicted popular governments. Madison's genius was in realizing that a republic did not have to be small to function effectively. He believed that in a large republic, the sheer diversity of interests, economic backgrounds, and religious beliefs would make it difficult for any single majority to form and oppress a minority. By dividing power horizontally among three distinct branches, separation of powers, and vertically between the national and state governments, federalism, Madison created a system of built-in friction. The underlying principle was that government should be empowered to govern, but it must be structurally constrained to protect the rights and liberties of the people. This system of checks and balances remains the bedrock of American constitutional law. Intellectual and practical statesmanship throughout history. Scholars have debated whether Madison should be classified more as a political philosopher or a practical politician. The reality is that he was a rare combination of both. As a philosopher, he studied Enlightenment ideals and envisioned an entirely new model of representative government. As a politician, he understood the art of the compromise. The Constitutional Convention succeeded not because one side got everything it wanted, but because delegates like Madison were willing to make critical compromises, such as the Connecticut Compromise regarding legislative representation. Madison's ability to navigate political friction was also evident during the drafting of the Bill of Rights. He initially opposed a Bill of Rights, arguing that the Constitution inherently protected rights by enumerating only limited powers to the federal government. However, as a pragmatic politician, he recognized that it was politically necessary to win the trust of the American people and preserve the Union. He therefore took up the pen and drafted the amendments himself, securing essential civil liberties. The influence of the Virginia Constitution before the U.S. Constitution was written. Madison was deeply involved in state-level politics, particularly in drafting the Virginia State Constitution alongside Thomas Jefferson and George Mason. His experience with Virginia's governing documents deeply influenced his national vision. For example, Virginia's Bill of Rights served as a direct inspiration for the Federal Bill of Rights. Furthermore, Madison's successful defense of religious freedom against state-sponsored religion in Virginia laid the philosophical groundwork for the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. The Virginia Plan, which he brought to the Constitutional Convention, was essentially a nationalized expansion of the Republican ideas he had tested and refined at the state level. Madison's role in the House of Representatives, although he is remembered as the primary architect of the Constitution, Madison's work in the House of Representatives was equally vital to the survival of the Republic. In the first congressional elections, he faced tough opposition from anti-federalists who wanted to rewrite the Constitution. By stepping up to serve in the House, Madison was able to steer the implementation of the government from the inside. He introduced the necessary legislation to establish executive departments, including the state and treasury departments. His most crucial legislative achievement during this time was shepherding the Bill of Rights through Congress, which successfully quieted anti-federalist opposition and lent immediate legitimacy to the new federal government. The War of 1812. A second war of independence, while Madison is celebrated primarily for the Constitution, his 2 terms as president were critical tests for the young nation. The War of 1812 is often viewed by historians as America's second war of independence. Prior to the conflict, both Great Britain and France treated the United States as a second-class nation, routinely violating American neutrality and maritime rights. Madison's decision to declare war was an assertion of American sovereignty. Despite logistical difficulties, a lack of funding, and internal political opposition, particularly from Federalists in New England who threatened to secede, the United States managed to hold its own against the world's foremost naval power. The resolution of the conflict effectively ended British interference in American domestic affairs and solidified the United States as a sovereign, independent republic on the world stage. It also sparked a renewed sense of American identity and national unity. Dolly Madison, an essential partner in statecraft. No discussion of James Madison's presidency is complete without mentioning his wife, Dolly Madison. Unlike her reserved and intellectual husband, Dolly was warm, outgoing, and socially adept. She played a crucial role in Washington, D.C. society, acting as an informal diplomat and hostess. Her weekly receptions and dinner parties helped bridge divides between rival political factions, allowing politicians to socialize and negotiate in a relaxed setting. Furthermore, her famous bravery during the British attack on Washington in 1814, where she remained in the White House to ensure George Washington's portrait was saved before fleeing, endeared her to the American public and cemented her status as one of the most respected first ladies in history. Lasting impact and modern relevance. Nearly 250 years after the founding of the nation, the U.S. Constitution remains the oldest written national constitution still in active use. Its longevity is a testament to the foresight of James Madison and his contemporaries. The three-branch system of government, the separation of powers, and the system of checks and balances continue to define the American political landscape. Furthermore, Madison's arguments in the Federalist Papers continue to be studied by political scientists, historians, and legal scholars. Whenever there is a legal debate regarding the limits of federal power, the protection of free speech, or the separation of responsibilities between the branches of government, Supreme Court justices and legal scholars regularly cite Madison's writings and his recorded notes from the Constitutional Convention. Madison viewed the Constitution not as a rigid, unchangeable text, but as a living framework that would require adjustments and interpretations as the nation grew. He understood that the success of the great American experiment in self-government ultimately rested on the active participation and vigilance of the American people. In his view, preserving liberty required an educated and engaged citizenry capable of holding their government accountable. In conclusion, James Madison's contributions to the United States are unparalleled. From his early work on the Virginia Constitution to his critical role in organizing the Constitutional Convention, recording its debates, advocating for ratification, drafting the Bill of Rights, and guiding the nation through the War of 1812, he was a nation builder in the truest sense. While his legacy is not without its flaws, most notably his lifelong involvement with the institution of slavery, his overarching vision for a balanced, democratic republic has stood the test of time. James Madison truly deserves his title as the father of the Constitution and remains one of the most significant figures in the political history of the world.